Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the VHU, the Czech Military History Institute in Prague in the Czech Republic, and we are taking a look at a number of really cool Czech prototypes in their collection. Specifically today, we have the URZ, one example of the 9 URZs ever manufactured. That is the Universal Hand Weapon. This is a super cool gun, both from a systems development perspective and also from a mechanical perspective. So mechanically speaking, this is a roller delayed blowback action, but it does not look like the roller delayed that you're used to seeing. It is, I mean, there aren't a lot of roller delayed systems out there, and they pretty much all copy the German method, the HK style. This is mechanically the same set of principles, but the setup is quite different, and I'm excited to pull it apart and show you. Now, from a systems design perspective, the intent here was to make a modular system that could be configured well, not really configured because the parts aren't interchangeable, but to have a standard platform that could be built as anything from an individual rifle or a sniper rifle up to a light, heavy, or vehicular mounted machine gun, all with the same operating parts, the same feed system, and easy manufacturing logistics. Now, the gun was designed, the program begins in 1962, of course, in Czechoslovakia, and the lead designer is Jiří Čermák. Now, he is the guy who designed the VZ-58 that the Czech military adopted, and so this is just a couple years later. Čermák sees the developments of the G3 in Germany and really wants to try his hand at a roller delayed or half-locked system. But the Army isn't really interested. In fact, the Army isn't interested at all. They don't need a new gun. So Čermák has to find some sort of excuse to make the thing. And what he ends up with, is the Department of Foreign Trade, or the Ministry of Foreign Trade in the Czech government. They're responsible for guns that are being supplied to allies as military assistance and stuff that's being sold for export to bring some more hard currency into the country. And they decide that, why, yes, it would be interesting to have a new firearms design to sell to the outside world. So, 1962, the program begins. 1964, the first guns are being manufactured. I think the first firing trial was in 1965. And the guns start in 7.62 by 39, the initial prototypes, which makes sense. That was the standard military cartridge in Czechoslovakia at the time. But about halfway through the program, actually like 66, 67, at the specific direction of the Ministry of Foreign Trade, the caliber is changed to 7.62 NATO, which is really a bit odd. This is socialist or communist Czechoslovakia making a NATO caliber Western cartridge rifle. And the reason is, presumably, they wanted to sell it to unaligned countries that were interested in having NATO compatible weapon systems. Similar to, well, you will see a variety of unaligned nations purchasing G3s, purchasing AR-10s at the time, purchasing FALs, and Czechoslovakia wanted to get in on some of that action. So 7.62 by 51 NATO became the standard caliber for the URZ program. Now, you'll notice I have a belt here. All of the guns, including the infantry rifle version, were actually belt fed, but using a direct operated, a mechanically actuated drum system. So the feed system's cool, the locking system is really cool. I think it's probably time that we just dive in, open this one up, and take a closer look at it. I'm going to start here by going straight to the markings, because there are only really two. URZ, that's Universal Hand Weapon, and a serial number 4584. These serial numbers for Czech experimental guns don't really have any system to them, any rhyme or reason. They're 4-digit numbers. They're sort of sequential, but not really sequential between different programs, and ultimately there's no meaning to be taken away from 4584. That's just the identifier number for this particular gun. Now, we also have selector markings. So we have a 3-position selector, safe, semi-auto, and full auto. This particular one is an open bolt firing gun. They did develop both open and closed bolt versions of the URZ. Out at the muzzle, we have a set of gas rings for launching rifle grenades. Certainly not a universal weapon if it can't do that. We then have a bayonet lug, good for either a bayonet or potentially a bipod. The Czechs used a clip-on bipod that attached to the bayonet lug. They had one for the VZ58, and they also had that sort of system in mind for the URZ. Here's our flip-up grenade launcher sight. And there it is, flipped up. Ranges 7,500, 125, and 150 meters. And when not in use, that folds down and locks in place. The regular front sight there, by the way, is a round pin. It is adjustable for windage like a submachine gun sight. So you screw it in or out about half a turn and you can move that pin a reasonable distance left to right. So that's how you zero the windage. And then the rear sight has some definite VZ58 overtones, although it is an aperture sight, adjustable up to 1,000 meters. Note the very VZ58 style sling rings, one on the front and one on the stock. We have a magazine release button here that allows me to pop the magazine out. This is both a drum and also a belt box. So if I lift these two pins up, I can open up the back, kind of like an RPD drum. And of course, there's nothing inside here, but there is a feed system built into the top of the drum. So if we look inside the magazine well, you can see a couple of cam tracks in the bottom of the bolt carrier. Those interact with these pins on the top of the drum, and as the bolt carrier goes forward and back, it's going to rotate these pins, which feed cartridges mechanically, like it's a proactive feeding system up from the drum into this feed position. So the belt itself is a Czech designed belt. It's similar to the RPD belt where it is a push-through system. So when normally loading a belt fed, you think brass to the grass. You want to have this visible from the top. This is the opposite. You want to have the brass visible on the top, because the way this is going to work is we're going to feed, these are dummy rounds, by the way. We're going to set that in this rotary thing, and then manually click it through twice. That presents our first cartridge in the feed position. So the bolt's going to come in through this little notch and push this cartridge up out of the belt, just like it was feeding out of a magazine. Now, with the rest of the belt, these belts were made in 10-round segments, and you can link a bunch of them together. You can just have an exposed belt out the side of the drum like this, or you can feed the belt into the drum and you can fit 50 rounds curled up inside here for it to act as a belt box. Note that we have the spring-loaded exit cover. This is where the empty belt segments come out, so you cannot cycle a live loaded belt all the way through, because that's in the way. So in order to unload it, we have a little catch right here. You push in on that. It's pretty stiff, actually. And that unlocks the one-way cam on this and allows me to pull the belt out backwards. All right, that's the feed system. Now let's get to the action. And the first thing, at least for me, I was very curious about what this thing was. This is actually the mainspring guide rod, because there is a whole lot of mainspring inside here. And in order to be able to reassemble it successfully reassemble it, you need a full-length guide rod. And that ends up sticking out the front of the handguard. So in order to manually cock the rifle, we have a charging handle here, which you pull out away from the gun, and then, oops, I'm on safe, which locks it. There we go. Pull this out, back, and we have a non-reciprocating charging handle there. Note that it does automatically open and then release the dust cover as the bolt goes back and forth. For disassembly, we have a pin here, captive pin, just like the pins on the VZ58. Pull that out, lift the dust cover up, and we have access to the internals of the gun. That's just a plain old stamped dust cover with the charging handle inside it. Now I'm going to, this comes out just like an AK, we're going to push it forward and lift it out. We'll zoom out a bit here so you can see just how much recoil spring is in this thing. Yeah, there you go. That's quite a lot of spring. So if it weren't for the full-length guide rod, there would be no way that you could reassemble this thing without the spring just springing out of place. With that out, bolt carrier comes back, lifts up, and that's it. That is field stripped. Now, you may be wondering, what's under the handguard? Can we see the gas piston? Well, no, because there is no gas piston, despite the fact that it has this thing, which sure looks like a gas piston. This is actually kind of like how the G3 has an extension on the bolt carrier that sure looks like a gas piston, but isn't. This is a cam that is out there to add mass to the bolt carrier, and it has this contoured track, which operates this on the inside to open and close the dust cover as the bolt opens and closes. Now, what we actually have here is a roller delayed system, and these are not like MG34 anti-friction rollers. These are actually the equivalent of HK's little small locking rollers. So first off, this pin is our ejector. You can see it comes through the bolt face, and it is normally held in place right there. So when the bolt's in the gun, this is going to sit here, and when the bolt goes all the way forward, this comes well out of the bolt. This does double duty where as long as it's in the bolt head, it prevents the bolt from rotating. Once this has gone far enough forward, the bolt head can rotate about 60 degrees down, and that's where it's actually locked. So, moving that all the way, we can, there we go, take the bolt head itself out. Those are our locking rollers, extractor. This is the feed pusher, basically. This is what pushes around out of the drum there, and then when it comes back over the drum, it's spring-loaded so it can snap up into the bolt face. We have a fixed firing pin. As I said, there were both open and closed bolt versions of this gun made. This is an open bolt one, so it has an exposed firing, or a fixed firing pin. And then we have this, which is an extra weight on the top of the bolt carrier with a little bit of spring in it, and this is an anti-bounce mechanism. So anti-bounce systems are essential in delayed blowback guns like this, because what you don't want is for your delayed blowback gun to close, bounce open a little bit, and in the process mostly unlock, and then fire while the gun's partially unlocked. That's actually how roller locking or roller delay was discovered. It was from a roller locked gun that didn't have an anti-bounce system in testing, and it bounced partway open and fired while it wasn't fully locked. So what this does is the bolt will close. This has some inertia to it, and it will tend to close. This will move forward more slowly when the bolt stops because of the spring in it. The bolt will hit, have a tendency to just bounce open, and that bounce is counteracted by this component moving forward. Even though it's not moving forward very far, it's enough to act as an anti-bounce system. All right, now the big question here is, how the heck does the roller delay work? Well, it's a little hard to see in there, but we have two curved surfaces right in here, and that's where, one on this side and one on this side, and that's where the rollers lock up. So let me put the bolt back in the gun. So we'll put that front nose in there. Note this is still not a gas piston. And then the ejector, lines up with that little notch. This drops in place, and when I pull the trigger, this can go forward. So when it's all the way forward, those rollers rotate down just like that. This is the half locked, the delay system. in place. So what happens is when you fire, pressure pushes directly back on the bolt head, pushes this whole thing back, but these rollers have to travel up an incline in the front trunnion of the gun, and they have to work at a mechanical disadvantage to do so while we have this heavy mass of the bolt carrier being pushed by this very long and fairly heavy recoil spring trying to hold them back. So this is, the geometry is different, but the principle is the same as the angled wedge in the center of an H&K bolt. Instead of an angled wedge, we have two cammed rotating surfaces on the inside of the trunnion. Now, you get the wrong impression if you just pull back the bolt carrier, because if we pull this back, we're artificially unlocking it ourselves. What actually happens when firing, and I'm going to simulate this by sticking a cleaning rod down the barrel of the gun. All right, so when we push on that cleaning rod and simulate pressure from a cartridge, you can see right there, let's do that one more time, you can see that the bolt carrier remains forward as that roller lifts up, and then the whole thing can cycle backwards. So if I open it manually, you can see the bolt carrier comes back first and then opens. When we push on the rod, right there, the rollers stay in contact with this element right here. So these curved surfaces are acting mechanically as the same element as that wedge in the HK system. And I think that's why they're so shiny. As I suspect these were very carefully hand filed or polished to exactly the right geometry, because a small change in the curvature of these two parts can result in a significant change in lock time, in opening time. And it doesn't take much difference in opening time to be the difference between a cartridge exploding and the rifle operating too sluggishly and not cycling properly. So that is the most interesting and unique roller delay system that I've ever seen. A couple last quick elements to point out. We have two big holes here. These are tripod mounting points because this was intended to be a universal receiver. You may have seen a button up here. This is used for locking into the tripod. So with just a regular infantry rifle or light machine gun, this little latch doesn't do anything. And then of course we have this very distinctive finish that you will probably recognize from the VZ58 rifles. One neat accessory for the URZ that they have here at the VHU is this, which is actually a blank firing adapter. So this fits into the muzzle over the muzzle device and then locks on to the bayonet lug. It acts as a muzzle restrictor and also an emergency safety device. It would probably be pretty bad for the gun if you fired a live round into it, but it would prevent the live round from going out and hitting somebody downrange. So yeah, well, the URZ version of the blank firing adapter there. The URZ has a relatively long barrel at 19.4 inches, and the overall gun is fairly long. The receiver's fairly long, but it's not nearly as heavy as you would expect from looking at it. This thing comes in at 3.88 kilos, or just about 9.5 pounds, which that's, it's not a super light PDW, but the gun from the outside looks like it ought to weigh a fair bit more. It's actually a pretty darn handy gun to maneuver around and to handle. All in all, 9 URZ guns were manufactured. A couple of the rifles, a couple of the machine guns, one of the tank guns. That was the last one that they got to, was like the solenoid firing vehicle mounted version. The first couple were in 7.62x39, probably the majority of them by a small margin were in 7.62 NATO. Actually, I should say, they made 9, but they only actually made 8 receivers. In late 1967, one of the open bolt 7.62 NATO guns had an out of battery detonation, basically exploded. They salvaged the receiver and rebuilt a new gun on the same receiver. So 8 receivers for 9 total guns. All of those guns, by the way, now reside here at the VHU. Anyway, the project continued until 1970, at which point all of the documentation, all of the technical information was turned over to the Ministry of Foreign Trade, And there, the trail of this design pretty much just dies. It never actually went into production. It doesn't appear to have had any further development after 1970, but there's no documentation that's been found on why or exactly what happened to it, although it's probably not that difficult to suppose that there could very well be political objections to selling guns in 7.62 NATO, or simply people decided that the market wasn't there for what was probably going to be a relatively expensive gun to manufacture and sell. So anyway, it all comes to an end in 1970, and we're left with just the 8 original guns manufactured, 8 surviving ones. So I'd like to give a really big thanks to the VHU for giving me access to this one to film and show to you guys. In addition to their rather quite impressive deposit and reserve collection of rare and prototype firearms, they also have a public military museum here in Prague, and it is really quite extensive and quite well done. In addition to sort of the standard displays you would expect, weaponry going all the way back to medieval hand weapons, they also have one entire wall of 20th century Czech prototype firearms all on display, and that's a really cool one to check out. So if you find yourself here in the Czech Republic, in Prague, make sure to take at least half a day to stop in and check out the museum. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.